Right now, while you're watching this video, your attic is probably sitting somewhere between 140 and 170 degrees. Your air conditioner is running full blast trying to keep your house at 72, and 1/3 of the cool air it's producing is disappearing before it ever reaches your bedroom. Not because your AC is broken, not because your insulation is bad, because a $5 piece of plastic is missing from your eaves and it's been missing since the day your house was built. That's not a sales pitch for a ventilation company. It's a peer-reviewed measurement from the largest solar roof research facility in the country. And the reason you've never heard about it has nothing to do with complicated technology. It has everything to do with who wrote the building code that controls your attic and when they wrote it. Here's the number that starts all of this. The Florida Solar Energy Center built a row of identical test cells at their Flex roof facility in 1994. Same black shingles on top, same thick fiberglass insulation underneath, same ridge vent at the peak. The only variable they changed was the intake at the bottom of the roof, the soffit vent under your eaves. One cell had the soffit sealed, one had it open. The cell with the sealed soffit delivered 66% more heat into the ceiling below it. Same attic temperature, same sun beating down on both roofs, but the heat moving through the ceiling into the living space was nearly 3 times higher when that intake was blocked. 3 times. That's the gap between a house where the AC runs constantly and a house where it cycles on and off like it's supposed to. Most people focus on the ridge vent at the top because it's the one that's visible from the street and the one roofers charge good money to install. But the same Florida study looked at that too. They compared a high-profile ridge vent, a low-profile one, and no ridge vent at all. Total heat difference between those 3 configurations, 4%. The thing nobody talks about is the entire game. The thing everybody pays for barely moves the needle. To understand why, you have to understand how attic ventilation actually works, and it's simpler than it sounds. Heat rises, everyone knows that, but hot air can only rise and escape if something is replacing it from below. Cold air pulling in from the eaves creates a pressure difference that drives hot air out at the ridge. Physicists call it the stack effect. The same principle that makes a fireplace draw. Block the intake at the bottom, and the whole loop shuts down. The hot air at the top has nowhere to go because nothing is pulling it. The attic stops breathing and the temperature spikes. Your soffit vent is the intake. Your ridge vent is the exhaust. Seal one end of a pipe and nothing flows through it. This is not a complicated concept. It's just one that a lot of homeowners have never had explained to them in plain language. So what's actually blocking the soffit? Not dirt, not debris. Your own insulation. In almost every attic with blown-in insulation, the material gradually migrates toward the edges over time. During re-insulation jobs, contractors push it right to the perimeter to hit the required R-value numbers, and in doing so, it presses up against the underside of the roof deck right at the eave, which is exactly where the air channel needs to exist. The soffit vent becomes a hole in the fascia with a wall of fiberglass behind it. Air can't get in. The stack effect collapses, and your attic temperature climbs. The Department of Energy requires a 2-inch air channel between the insulation and the roof deck, running the full width of every rafter bay all the way from the soffit to the ridge. Without that channel, the soffit vent is decoration. The fix is a rafter vent baffle. It's a stiff piece of foam or rigid plastic about 4 feet long that slides up between 2 rafters and holds that 2-inch channel open regardless of how much insulation is packed in around it. It costs around $5 per piece at any hardware store. A typical single-story home needs 15 to 20 of them. Total material cost is right around $100 for the entire perimeter. Here's what makes this story genuinely interesting though. The fact that this problem exists at all isn't an accident of physics. It's an accident of history. The ventilation ratio that controls your attic, the ratio that got insulation packed against your eaves in the first place, was written in January of 1942 by people who were not thinking about summer heat. They weren't thinking about Texas attics or Phoenix rooftops. They were solving a completely different problem in a completely different climate. The wartime FHA was overhauling its entire set of construction guidelines. The attic ventilation section got drafted almost directly from a paper published 3 years prior by a University of Minnesota professor named Frank Rowley. Rowley had spent a winter running experiments on small wooden test boxes in a Minnesota field. 3 boxes, 1 season, measuring frost and condensation on the underside of the roof sheathing. His conclusion was that a higher ventilation ratio prevented moisture buildup. The FHA read his paper, picked a single number out of his data, 1 square foot of vent for every 300 square feet of attic floor, and wrote it into the national standard. That number, 1 to 300, has controlled American roof construction for over 80 years, and nobody who wrote it ever ran a single hot weather experiment. There's one more piece of this history that tends to make people sit up a little straighter. Rowley's research wasn't independent. The funding came from the National Mineral Wool Association, the lobbying arm of the insulation manufacturing industry. The people who paid for the science were the same people who profit when more insulation gets packed into more attics, even if it ends up crushing the air gap at the eave in the process. After the war, a researcher named Ralph Britton ran a separate round of tests using the same ratio. He got the same frost prevention result Rowley had gotten, confirmed the number, and wrapped up the study. Nobody in that entire chain stopped to ask how the ratio performed on a July afternoon in Georgia. The cold weather moisture problem became the only problem anyone was officially solving, and it calcified into permanent national code. In 1995, a senior building researcher at the University of Illinois named William Rose finally dug back through the original documents. Rose had built his career around building envelopes and moisture science. His conclusion, documented through Oak Ridge National Laboratory, landed like a demolition charge on 80 years of roofing code. He found that the 1 to 300 ratio had no research behind it. No thermal testing, no hot weather data, no cooling math of any kind. The FHA writers in 1942 had simply chosen a number, assigned it to every house in America, and walked away. Rose called it what it was, an arbitrary figure with no citations backing it up, a guess dressed up as a standard, and nobody had corrected it in the half-century since. Which brings us back to what that guess is costing you right now. Roofing researchers have documented attic temperatures of 160 degrees in poorly ventilated homes across Las Vegas and 170 degrees in dark tile roofs throughout the Southwest. Texas homes have been measured at 150 to 170 degrees in mid-afternoon. And the Department of Energy has found that the duct system running through that superheated, unconditioned attic loses between 25 and 40% of its cooling capacity to the surrounding heat before the air ever reaches your living space. You paid for that cool air. The attic consumed it before it got anywhere near you. There's a second failure that happens when the baffle is missing that most contractors never mention. It's called wind washing. Without a baffle holding a clear channel along the roof deck, wind pushing in through the soffit opening doesn't travel upward the way the ventilation system requires. Instead, it hits the insulation at the perimeter and drives it inward, piling it toward the middle of the attic floor and exposing the framing near the eave. That stripped zone above the eave is now a direct thermal bridge from the roof into the room underneath. No insulation, no air gap, just heat conducting straight down into your ceiling. One piece of plastic prevents both the blocked soffit and the wind-driven insulation displacement at the same time. The Energy Star program had to publish an explicit warning telling homeowners never to cover soffit vents with insulation. The official government efficiency program issued a public notice correcting the thing that the original 1942 code accidentally allowed, 80 years later. The shingles pay a price too. Asphalt shingles degrade faster the hotter they run, and a poorly ventilated attic ages a roof out in about 15 years. A properly vented roof with identical shingles and identical sun exposure routinely hits 25. The only difference is the soffit. Here's how you do the fix yourself in a Saturday morning. Start with the inspection. Grab a headlamp and get into the attic. Work your way around the perimeter and check where the roof deck slopes down to meet the eave. What you're looking for is a gap of daylight visible through the soffit opening. If you can see light coming through, airflow exists. If the insulation is packed solid against the decking with no visible gap, that rafter bay is completely blocked. Go around the full perimeter and mark every sealed section with painter's tape on the nearest rafter so you can locate each one when you're ready to install. Pick up rafter vent baffles at any home improvement store. Standard sizing runs 4 feet long and just over 22 inches wide, built to fit between rafters at common 16 and 24-inch spacings, around $5 each. Clear the insulation back from the eave using a rake or a longboard, open the bay up, and feed the baffle up against the roof deck so it bridges from the soffit opening toward the ridge. Fasten it to the rafter framing on each side with a hammer stapler. 2 fasteners per side holds it solidly in place. Repeat that across every blocked bay along the entire perimeter. For a typical 1,900 square foot single-story house, figure 15 to 20 baffles, $100 in materials. Beyond the hammer stapler, you need a respirator, knee pads, a headlamp, and something long to push insulation back. Total tool spend under $50 and everything gets reused next time you're up there. Pre-1960 construction is a separate situation. Many houses from that era have solid fascia boards with no intake vents cut into them at all. The baffle has nothing to work with until there's an actual opening. A 4-inch hole saw and circular soffit vent inserts about $3 each. Handle that, 2 per bay, evenly spaced across the eave. One important thing to know, if your attic has been re-insulated since 2010, there's a strong chance the contractor pushed new insulation right back against the eaves and sealed whatever baffles were originally there. Check it every time someone goes up there. The Florida Solar Energy Center also found that once the soffit fix is in place, sealing the ductwork running through the newly cooler attic cuts space cooling energy use by another 8%. That's your compressor cycling less, your equipment lasting longer, and your thermostat actually telling the truth. 80 years ago, a handful of researchers in Minnesota sat in a winter field measuring frost on the underside of a wooden box. Their numbers got picked up by a wartime government committee, locked into the National Building Standard, and never revisited for heat. That's the entire reason your attic is 160 degrees today. A $5 piece of plastic is the correction they never made. Now you know how to make it yourself.